Welcome to Based on a True Story, the podcast that compares your favorite Hollywood movies with history. Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs. If you know what I'm quoting from, you already know what we're going to talk about today. That's right, today we're learning about Die Hard, which, of course, is not a franchise that's based on a true story. But the character of John McClane is something that a lot of people think is a realistic cop. So that begs the question, is he a realistic cop? Well, we have a lot to cover today, so we're going to skip the normal movie synopsis because we're not just talking about a single movie storyline, but specifically how John McClane handles events from across the entire franchise. And helping us separate fact from fiction in the movie to find out how realistic of a cop John McClane is, we're going to be joined today by retired cop Patrick O'Donnell. Patrick is the host of the podcast called Cops and Writers, where he offers tips from his own 25-year career on how writers can become more accurate with the job of being a police officer. Patrick also has a new book of his own out called The Good Collar, so we'll make sure to ask him about that too. Before we connect with Patrick, though, let's set up two truths and a lie. Now, if you're new to the show, this is something we do on every episode to help you practice what this show is all about, separating fact from fiction. So I'm going to give you three facts that you're going to hear about throughout this episode, but one of those is just an all-out lie. Are you ready? Okay, here they are. Number one, local police are often called on to assist federal agencies for arrests. Number two, off-duty cops from the U.S. can make arrests when they're on vacation in another country. Number three, when a cop runs someone's criminal history that's logged and monitored. Got him? Okay, now as you're listening to our story today, listen closely to see if you can figure out which one of those is a lie. And if you're watching the video version of this, you can see I'm holding up an envelope, and in this envelope is the answer. So we're going to open this at the end of the episode to see if you got it right. Okay, now it's time to connect with Patrick O'Donnell about the accuracy of John McClane in Die Hard. Our chat today will be a little different than a usual episode of Based on a True Story because we're not looking at a single movie and we're not even really looking at a real person from history. But what we are looking at is a very real job, how it's portrayed on screen by one of the most popular police officers in the movies. So if you were to give the Die Hard franchise a letter grade for how accurately John McClane shows us what a real police officer's job is like, what would it get?
I would go D+ to C-. I think that would be my grade for John. Yeah.
Honestly, it's a little higher than I was expecting.
Yeah, I'm trying to be very charitable here. And I like Bruce Willis. I love the first Die Hard movie. The rest of them, yeah. But hey, that's Hollywood, right?
That's how it goes. And I guess as with many franchises, it starts off and then it just kind of starts to,
Yeah, and I was thinking about that this morning. It's like one that pops into my head that was almost a little bit better was Terminator 2, I thought. I love the first Terminator, but T2, the way John Cameron filmed that and, the stunts and man, it was so over the top for that time period.
I think that's one of those things that movies like that will stand out more because so many sequels in the franchises just do drop down that when you have one where actually this is better, it stands out that much more.
Yes, exactly. It's like, I was thinking about Rocky, it's like, I love the Rocky series, and the first one, of course, was amazing. Second one was like, yeah. Third one, I love Mr. T. So, I mean, for comedic value, it was awesome. I was like, what do you predict for, the fight, Clubber? He's like, pain, I predict pain. And I was like, oh, I wanted to fall on the ground. I was laughing so hard. I'm like, I love this stuff.
It makes for great entertainment, that's for sure.
It does.
If we go back to the franchise of Die Hard, John McClane in the first movie is a cop from New York City visiting his estranged wife in Los Angeles. And of course, he happens to be at the wrong place at the wrong time when all hell breaks loose. Throughout the movie, there are numerous lines of dialogue about how McClane is out of his jurisdiction. But as a cop, McClane still takes it upon himself to do something about the situation unfolding around him. Let's say An off-duty police officer is visiting a different city for personal reasons, like we see in the movie, and then they find themselves in the middle of the wrong place at the wrong time, major crime happening in the movie. How realistic is it for the police officer to take it upon themselves to fight back against the criminals like we see John McClane doing in the movie?
Most of the time, you're just going to be a good witness. Yeah, you're going to look at everything through cop eyes. It's like, okay, I'm going to look at you. Say I'm in a situation where like something is getting robbed. I'm in a grocery store or a bank or something like that. 9 out of 10 times, nobody's going to get shot. Nothing's going to go too crazy. And most of the time they don't even have guns. They threaten like a gun or an explosive or whatever. So it's like, I'm going to be aware of my surroundings, and I'm going to be like, okay, the guy that's doing all this is a white male, about 40 years of age with a beard and mustache, medium build, wearing a gray
me.
shirt.
No.
And, yeah. And glasses. That's where my head is going.
Yeah.
Then I'm just like, okay, is he right or left-handed? What's he holding, like the bag? What's he doing most of his stuff with? Is there any piercings, tattoos, anything that's, so you're going to be looking like a cop. That's what you're going to be doing. But I will use a caveat. If you think somebody is in imminent danger of getting killed, you're going to take action. It's the cop inside of you. Yeah, we can't help ourselves. So as far as jurisdiction goes, if I'm out in LA, I was out in LA, oh man, about 20 years ago. I couldn't go around like arresting people or anything like that. You could do a citizen's arrest, quote unquote, but all you're doing is opening yourself up to liability. And, you're going to let anything short of an axe murder get away because you don't want to get sued later. And then you're going to get into trouble with your department, et cetera. So the chances are very, very slow, very slim, very slim.
They start off, if I remember right from the movie, like the first thing that John McClane notices is something going wrong is there's gunfire. So right away, he's like, okay, somebody's life might be in danger. And so it kind of switches into that mode, it seems.
Yeah, and and he's talking to himself. That's one thing I did like about that movie was he's talking to himself. It's like, why didn't you go in there and try to stop him, John? And then he's like, well, John, you would be dead right now, John, if you tried doing that. And it's like, absolutely, that makes total sense to me. It was like, yep.
The inner monologue that he speaks out loud so we can understand what he's
so we can hear it. Right, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Another key plot point for John McClane in the first Die Hard movie is how he has to fight the local law enforcement. And I don't mean physically fighting them like he does with the bad guys, but he can't seem to get anyone to believe what's happening. For example, when he first calls for help, the dispatch operator scolds him, saying that she's going to report McClane for using a channel reserved for emergencies. It's like, what do you think I'm calling for? And then later on, there's cops that do arrive at Nakatomi Plaza, and the deputy chief of police doesn't like John McClane because he's a mouthy cop from New York City. And then even after the federal agents arrive on the scene, they never seem to listen to any of John McClane's warnings from the inside of the building. And then that culminates at the end of the movie when the federal agents are actually in the helicopter shooting, and they start shooting at McClane on the roof because they think he's one of the criminals. How well does the movie do showing the way local law enforcement would react to a crime being reported by an off-duty police officer from another city?
That almost never happens. But obviously, it's like most of the time, if they're an out of jurisdiction cop in our city, if they're on official business, they're going to check in, hopefully. It's like, hey, you know what? I'm a Chicago cop. I'm coming up to Milwaukee to interview a witness for a homicide. So I'm going to let you know for two reasons. One, it's the right thing to do. And two, if shit goes sideways, then at least, somebody knows where I am. And if I was like the acting lieutenant, I was a sergeant for 17 years. And once in a blue moon, I get pulled off the street and I'd have to sit behind a desk and run the shift if my boss wasn't there. I was a sergeant, he was a lieutenant. So I would get a phone call from, hey, I'm from blah, blah, blah city. We're going to be checking for a suspect that we have a warrant on. It's not high risk. We're just going to do a door knock. And the first things out of my mouth is like, you want some help? And I would try to get them some help. So there's usually, not always, but usually good cooperation. The feds are really bad at that, especially the FBI. They don't want anybody playing in their sandbox. So unless they need you, then all of a sudden they're super cooperative. But that's another story for another day. But yeah, as far as, okay, I'm an out of jurisdiction cop, I'm in your city. Yeah, I mean, in 25 years, I rarely had an off-duty cop that was like on vacation or visiting their kid or whatever in Milwaukee all of a sudden get involved in some high stakes arrest. It really doesn't happen.
That's why it's for the movies.
Yeah, sorry, John.
Well, if we move to the second movie, Die Hard 2, this time John McClane is an LA police officer who's waiting for his wife's plane to land at Washington's Dulles Airport. And just like the last movie, again, he finds himself the wrong place, the wrong time. And at first, now we have airport police involved, and they don't believe McClane. But then as things start to go from bad to worse, we see McClane actually working with the local law enforcement at the airport. So not only do we have John McClane as an off-duty police officer for a different city, from a different city, for personal reasons, but then it's also happening at an airport where they have their own law enforcement. And then on top of that, since Die Hard 2 came out in 1990, before the TSA was formed in 2001, I felt like things would probably be a little bit different now. But is it likely that a city police officer would collaborate with the TSA or airport police like we see John McClane doing in the movie?
Well, like TSA, they're a branch of Homeland Security, and they really aren't cops. The way cops look at TSA is kind of, we look at them as JV. I mean, there's some fine TSA agents, and they do a thankless job, and it's a very important job. But a lot of them, yeah, I shouldn't say a lot. There are some that are that guy or that gal that has a little bit of power, and you could tell, they're abusing it, and they couldn't get a job as a quote unquote real cop somewhere. I know I'm hurting some feelings out there. Sorry. But, I mean, there's a couple of people that I know that are TSA agents. I have one friend that's a TSA agent that did 30 years as a cop, and he didn't have a pension. Where he worked, there was no pension. So he had to go work for the feds. That's a federal job. And they offered a pension and health insurance until he hits, well, health insurance was the biggie. He had zero health insurance after he retired, and he was like 55. So he got 10 years before he's going to go on Medicare. So he kind of had to do something like that. And, and he's not a idiot or anything like that. And then I knew some people that just wanted to do it because they thought it looked cool and, whatever. And they're doing it as a job, and they treat it like that. And hey, yay, good on them. But cops aren't going to be, like the airport cops, most of them, well, all of them are, sworn police officers that have full arrest powers. And if I'm out of jurisdiction, I'm John McClane, with whatever is going on, if I was the airport police, I would use that cop as much as possible for intel of what's going on, try and get some information. But I wouldn't include them in any like takedowns or any action, because first off, he has no arrest powers where he's at. He can't arrest anybody. He's John Q. Citizen running around an airport with a gun. It's like, why are you doing that? Come on, John, you shouldn't do that. So, yeah. So to answer your question, yeah, I mean, the TSA really wouldn't be coordinating with that. It would be the cops from the airport if there's a situation like that. And if they have to call in help, they'll call in help, from other agencies. They wouldn't be relying on anybody that's a civilian, i.e. John McClane.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you clarifying that, because, I mean, the movie did come out before TSA was even a thing. So I just know security has changed so much that when this movie takes place in the airport, it's like, well, there's got to be maybe this extra layer to it. But it sounds like maybe there even wouldn't be as much different, other than, setting aside all the fictional aspect of it, but just from the, the airport security and police officer, it sounds like that sort of relationship would still be pretty similar to the way it is now.
Well, yeah, I did an internship when I was in college with the sheriff's department in Milwaukee, and they had the airport. They still do. They're in charge of security for the airport, and they have a little substation there, and you have sheriff's deputies that are, walking around doing whatever. Some are plainclothes, some are uniformed. and they take care of business at the airport. And I had a real good tour and understanding of the airport when I was an intern. And one of the things that really stuck in my head with the movie was, the tower is a sacred place. John McClane would not be in the tower, period. I mean, that is like that is secure. And the air traffic controllers are in the basement. They're not upstairs in the tower. They're all in the basement looking at scopes, looking at their computer screens, doing whatever. And you can't even say a word. I mean, that's hollow ground. They can't have any distractions for obvious reasons. Yes, for very obvious reasons. And when I retired from being a cop, I got a job with Delta throwing bags. I unloaded and loaded planes at the airport in Milwaukee. And that gave me a real good understanding too of the security, because almost everything is restricted. And you have a badge, it's just like a ID, either around your arm or a lanyard or whatever. And that gets you into certain areas that you have to get into, to do your job. But the thing about it is you only go in one person at a time. Say you and I are in the concourse and we have to go unload a plane, and we're by one of the gates. You see the doors where the gate agent enters like a keypad, some numbers into a keypad. And then there's 2 layers. You do the keypad and you flash your little ID thing. And then the little green light goes on and it unlocks the door. Well, I can't just follow you. I have to go through the same ritual. Every person that goes through that restricted area has to do that. So there are layers. There's so many layers of security when it comes to an airport. Oh my God. So it was,
which is probably a good thing.
Oh Lord, yes. It's like, but it's borderline laughable. Well, it is laughable when I'm watching that. I'm like, oh, this ever.
He just kind of walks in. Yeah. He's
problem. Yeah, why not?
Well, they don't want to go to the intricacies of the airport security in the movie, true. I guess. A little more boring.
Yes, it would be.
There is another form of collaboration that we see happening in Die Hard 2 with John McClane uses a connection that he made in the first movie. That's Reginald VelJohnson's character, Al Powell. So in Die Hard 2, we see McClane calling up Powell to get some information on the new villains outside of official channels. So the movie implies that there was this kind of ongoing connection between McClane and Powell. I know law enforcement agencies work together a lot in official capacities, but is it normal for individual police officers to work with other police officers from other precincts that they met in the past, kind of like we see in the movie?
Yes. If you work together in the past, yeah, and, maybe they text on the regular or they go out for drinks or whatever, you can't help that. But I will use the caveat, whenever you run somebody on a computer, like for warrants or their driver's license or a criminal history, there's a history of you doing that. You're logged on as Patrick O'Donnell. Sergeant Patrick O'Donnell was looking to see what, Dan's criminal history was. And, February 17th at, 10:15 in the morning. Everything is recorded. So, you have to be able to explain why you're doing what you're doing.
Again, for good reason, I'm sure.
Yes. Yeah, let's see what my ex-wife is up to. All right. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to abuse the power. So yes, absolutely.
Makes sense. Well, in Die Hard 2, we see another returning character from the first movie. That's Thornburg. He's played by William Atherton. Thornburg is the pesky TV reporter who's always trying to get in the way. He's getting a scoop on the story, right? So he's always getting in the way. So if we're to believe the first 2 Die Hard movies, the media can get in the way of cops trying to do their jobs. From your experience, have you ever heard of the media hampering the ability for cops to do their jobs like we see in the movie?
We have a tenacious relationship with the press. Sometimes they can be your ally. If you have, like, say, a silver alert, you have some, a senior citizen that has dementia or, some cognitive issue. And, right now, I live in Wisconsin and we just got to 0. It's been below 0, all morning. So if, grandma's out there and she's just wearing like a windbreaker, we could use the press. It's like, hey, you know what? Come on down. This is what she looks like. This is the last place she was seen. So, you know what? You could use the power of the press for that. They can be your ally. Most of the time, they're annoying. Most of the time, they're trying to sneak through they go over the line, both literally and metaphorically. It's the yellow crime scene tape. They just want to get through it so badly. But if you're...
It's like a race running through it and break the tape, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But if you're in a big scene, what happens usually is we'll corral the media into like a staging area. And most police departments have a PIO. It's called oh, the PIO is the Public Information Officer. And they are usually the ones that are going to talk to the press. If it's a real big deal, sometimes the chief may come out and talk to the press, etc. It all depends on what's going on. I mean, we had an officer that was shot, and thankfully he's okay now, but he was shot in the chest with a rifle. And the mayor came out, the chief came out, and they all talked to the press. Now, dealing with elected officials of every stripe, they love being behind the microphone. They love the camera in their face. Us? Absolutely not. We don't want anything to do with, a camera in our face, especially at a crime scene, because we got stuff we got to do. So it's more of a pain in the butt than anything else. And one thing that really stood out to me, I was a rookie cop at a pretty high profile homicide. It was a cold Wisconsin night, and there's this reporter out there, and I recognized him from, TV. Back then, you watch the network TV shows, the network TV stations for your news. And I'm like, oh my God, that's, Dan, whatever his last name was. And I come up to him, I look, and I'm like, oh my God, you're really ugly. Holy, he had like 20 pounds of makeup on his face. I mean, it was caked on thick. It was like Phyllis Diller, for God's sakes. And I was just like, wow. And I've never seen a man before that wore makeup, and I was just like, well, this is an interesting night. All right.
Before 4K TVs where you could see every port.
Oh, yeah. You wouldn't want to see him on 4K. You'd want a tube TV for that guy. It was bad news. Or he had a face for radio. Let's just say that. Yeah.
I was going to say, I've heard that phrase. Yeah, I hate the face for radio.
Yeah. I had a couple more observations about this Die Hard, if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, starting out with the naked kata. Like the bad guy is doing this like karate kata, like they're called.
Oh
katas.
yeah. It's
like
all like
forms.
sweaty. Yeah,
Yeah,
I was
and I'm
watching
like, why is that there? I don't understand it. I'm like, ew, this is kind of gross. Why is this here? And I'm like, okay. And then John McClane is a lieutenant all of a sudden at LAPD. He's like anointed. If he would go to, especially back then, you start out as a cop and, you're going to go through all the selection stuff. He wouldn't be a lieutenant. They don't care.
Transferring from New York to LA, I think
there is no
the movie implies because his wife was in LA, so he wanted to move closer to her.
Correct. There's no such thing as lateral transfer back then from New York to LA. So maybe he would be a cop. Maybe. With the time frame, he'd probably still be in the academy. He'd be nothing. So that was amusing to me. Then, there was a woman with a stun gun on the airplane. I'm like, how the hell did she get that through security? Yeah.
Again, that was kind of one of those things of like, this is before 9/11. Maybe,
right.
I mean, things were different, but still, I feel like they still would have taken that.
One thing from working as a baggage guy, we called ourselves baggage apes, just, throwing the bags around. There was an open golf bag on a conveyor belt. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Come on. Those golf clubs would be all over the place. And I hated golf bags. When I'd see just a cart full of those coming at me, I'd be like, oh, they're so awkward and just, they sucked. And then also I noticed one of the bad guys in like one of the big shooting scenes, he starts out with a Glock and then he ends the scene with a Beretta. And I'm like, how did he do that? So my eye caught that right away. And I'm like, no, that's not going to happen. And then probably the final thing with the Army coming in, there's no way the Army's coming into that. The Army doesn't The Army doesn't respond to that. They're not law enforcement. That's a totally different thing.
That's a really great point. I mean, in the first movie, it's I feel like with the second one, it was a lot of the first movie over again and then stepping it up. So like in the first movie, the people coming in were the feds. And then the second movie, it's like, well, how do we go one step higher? It's the Army, right?
Yeah. And I'm like, why are, this is making zero sense to me right now. I'm like, what the hell? Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to be fictional, might as well just go all in, right?
Yeah. You know what? You're absolutely right. Absolutely.
Well, on the third movie, that's Die Hard with a Vengeance, at the beginning of this movie, John McClane is forced to go to Harlem wearing a sandwich board with some very racist phrase that I won't repeat here. But the movie shows that it's the first of a series of things that the bad guy is going to do. In the movie, it's Jeremy Irons' character, Simon. And he's forcing McClane to do all of these things. And if McClane doesn't comply with Simon's demands, then Simon says he's going to blow up a bomb in a very public place. Obviously, police officers risk their lives in the line of duty, but how realistic is it for a police officer to comply with the bad guy's demands to avoid disaster like we see John McClane doing in this movie?
Almost not. Never. Not very.
We don't negotiate with terrorists is one of the first things that kind of comes to mind.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing. They never negotiated. You would get, the police department has negotiators, and that's what would be used. Most police departments, were trained in negotiating, and then there are negotiators. That's their forte. That's what they train on, and they train us up on that, et cetera, et cetera. But in a pinch, I guess, if it was, I didn't have any other choice and I knew somebody was going to get blown up, it's like, yeah, I'll do whatever it takes to do that. And then John McClane was suspended. He wasn't on active duty. Remember
That's
at the beginning of the movie.
They had to find him like he was all drunk and everything and hungover and had the headache. Yeah.
This is so stupid. And I'm just like, okay, this guy is, and this inspector's in this van with him before they put him out on the street. And, his backup is like 10 blocks away. That would not happen. They would have eyes on him the entire time. They would not just let him.
That was really weird. I think the movie tries to explain away why they call McClane, because Simon specifically asked for McClane, which we'll find out towards the end of the movie why. But the backup being further away, it's like that seemed really weird, especially in a major city like that. I mean,
absolutely.
You could be in buildings, or there's so many ways that you could be closer.
There are all kinds of ways we could be close. And, we wouldn't just throw him to the wolves, knowing that his ass is going to get kicked. It's like, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. And then hand him a gun too. So he's not only he's going to, get his ass kicked, but they're going to take the gun and probably do something worse, right? I mean,
absolutely. Yeah, no, that I was looking at that and I'm like, and the chief inspector, and I don't think they have chief inspectors in New York, but whatever. And, he's back to being a New York cop again. He flip-flops around from department to department. Yeah, with the greatest of ease, New York, just welcomes him back. I was like, oh, we missed you. Come on back down and we'll make you a detective again without doing anything. It was like, no, it doesn't work like that.
So this will be the third time he's going through training again.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, like, they have like this highest ranking person in this like surveillance van. That wouldn't happen. They'd be in their office. We have people for that. That's what it all boils down to.
Well, we find out at the end of Die Hard with a Vengeance that Simon's plan all along was to make John McClane do all of these things. Basically, it's a distraction from his real goal, robbing billions of dollars worth of gold from the Federal Reserve. And obviously, the movie's storyline is fictional, but in your experience as a police officer, have you ever had criminals using distractions to try to keep you from noticing the true intentions?
Not anything this big. Most, and
well,
I just find it
billions of dollars.
Right. I find it humorous that, it's like, you need a new plot line. I mean, come on, okay, they're trying to rob this, whatever, it's like, okay, that's been used a few times, but okay, retread that, baby. But, and of course, the main bad guy has to have an accent. I don't know why. Maybe it makes him more villainy or something, but all the bad
foreigner.
people. Yeah, it has to be something like that. But as far as distractions go, no. I mean, the closest I came was we had two kids, they're like 18, 19 years old, detained. It was like some kind of girlfriend calls on the boyfriend, blah, 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 allegations of this, that, and the other thing. And two of my cops find this guy and his buddy by a bus stop, maybe about 5 blocks down. And it's like, we're just talking to him. And I could tell something is weird. And I'm like, this kid has ants in his pants. It's summertime. His eyes are darting all over the place. And he's just real squirrely. So I'm like, stand up. So I put handcuffs on him. And I'm like, you know what? These come off just as easy as, they go on. I said, I just don't trust you right now. And he says, okay. And then, he calmed down. And my cop is in her squad car running him, for warrants, et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, we're by a car dealership. He's like, oh man, look at that car over there. So I look like that and I look back and he's gone. He's running like the fastest track star in the Olympics with handcuffs behind his back. And I'm just like, oh. I mean, he's wearing like athletic shorts and a t-shirt and, tennis shoes. I'm wearing combat boots and I've got about 30 pounds of gear. He's 18. I'm 53. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I weigh 220 without the gear. And this kid maybe weighs $160 and he's sprinting. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't let this happen. So, the cop tries to chase him with her car. Then she runs out of pavement. Then I'm going four-wheeling with this guy running after him. And I finally get him. And the only reason I got him was he's got asthma. And I'm like, oh, thank God for asthma. Yeah, because he probably would have outran me. And I'm like, that'd be embarrassing. But he distracted me enough to, and it happened like in half a second. And I felt so stupid. And I'm the boss. I'm just like, But, we scooped him up, got him an ambulance, and he was fine. And it turns out he had a warrant for bank robbery. That's why he was running. So, yeah, the feds wanted him. He robbed a bank. So I'm just like, okay, that's a good pinch. That's a good arrest. I'll take it. But I'm just glad I got him.
Yeah, I guess there's a little difference between what we see in the movie and look over there.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. It wasn't anything like, pre-planned or anything. And, there's clues, when they start like, if you have somebody that's like stopped on the street, something like that, if their eyes are darting around, they're looking for an escape. They're looking for the safest, fastest egress away from you. So I should have been smarter. I'm a big car guy. I'm like, oh really? And I'm like, son of a biscuit. There he goes.
Well, we often see these things in action movies where people are shooting each other, and this Die Hard is no different from that. Obviously, there's a ton of Hollywood fiction, but in this movie, there seems to be really no hesitation for him to shoot off any gun he gets a hand on. It really stood out to me. There was one scene where John McClane just kind of walks up to one of the dump trucks. He knew the bad guys were in it, and so he just starts shooting inside without even verifying that they're actually who he thought was driving the truck. Of course, it's a movie, and he was right. They were the bad guys, but can you share what it's like for a police officer to discharge their weapon compared to what we see happening in the movie?
If you're shooting at a human, there has to be an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm to yourself or others. That's like the statute. That's the criminal statute. Because if I shoot and kill somebody, say you have a hostage, you have the gun to the poor person's head that's was in the wrong place at the wrong time. You're robbing the convenience store, and I just walk in, kind of thing as a cop. Will I shoot you? Probably, depending. But if there's 2 or 3 innocent people behind you, no, I'm not. There's so many things to consider, because it's not just it's like I said before, there has to be an imminent threat of death or great bodily harm to yourself or others. And great bodily harm is some type of harm that is most likely to cause death. So death, that kind of thing. So you have to be really cognizant of, okay, do I meet the statutory requirements? Because if I shoot you, one human being killing another human being is homicide. Now, if it's, in the line of duty where you're preventing, i.e. me getting killed, in self-defense or somebody else, that's justifiable homicide. You're not going to get criminally charged, but it's still a homicide, and that's how it gets investigated. But you can't, so you have things to think about is like, okay, is this statutorily okay? Then you think, okay, am I going to hurt somebody doing this or kill somebody else? That's why people are like, why can't you shoot the gun out of the bad guy's hand, et cetera, et cetera. Most people aren't that good of a shot. You go for, it's so silly because, it's hard that's a skill and it's a diminished, some cops are great shots, some aren't so great. We have to qualify every year, and I still do. I have an HR 218, so I have to go through the same course, and I can still, I'm a good shot. But nighttime, I'm chasing somebody, my heart rate and blood pressure are way up. There's so many things to consider. And, again, you have to consider the risk to civilians, and you have to consider the risk of blue on blue shooting, where you accidentally shoot another cop in like crossfire. So you have to be aware of a lot of different stuff before you pull that trigger. And what we would always say is like, you can't put the bullet back in the gun.
Very different than what we see with John McClane in the movies, that's for sure.
Well, I'm a huge Dirty Harry fan, and it's like, man, that guy I don't know how many guys he would kill in one episode, in one movie, excuse me. And I'm just like, holy cow. Just, yeah.
I mean, in the movie with John McClane, he obviously isn't putting that much thought into anything. Not anything, but when he's shooting, he shoots when he feels he wants to shoot. It's not really. I'm gonna think about who is driving in that scene with the dump truck. He's not even really putting any thought into before he just pulls out the gun and just shoots into the door and kills the driver. Right? It's not, I'm gonna put this guy in handcuffs or whatever. It's kill first, ask questions later.
True. Yeah, and a couple of things, to finish up with this Die Hard. Yeah, Samuel L. Jackson is working with a cop? No. They would use him for information. They would interview him, and that would be the end of it. He wouldn't be riding around with him as like his sidekick. That's not going to happen. Yeah.
I think this movie's excuse for that was Simon forced him to do it, right? Which was kind of goes baback to the whole do whatever Simon says.
That would not happen. No, because, it's like, okay, now we're putting his life in jeopardy. He's an innocent civilian, that's trying to help out. It's like, absolutely not. No way. And then, Bruce Willis is trying to get the fire department, so he calls in an officer down. That's not necessary. And it's really bad taste, to tell you the truth. And then the subway cop, there was a scene in the subway. He's drawn down, he's pointing a gun at a kid for hopping a turnstile and using his phone. And I'm like, well, this is just silly. You wouldn't do that. I mean, unless you thought he was armed or something like that. And then I don't know who outfitted these guys, but like the extras that were cops, they're wearing their police hats, but they don't have a cap shield on it. It's like a little badge that goes on the hat, the police hat. We call them cap shields. And like half of them had those. And I'm like, they wouldn't let you walk out of the precinct house unless you had that cap shield on. You go through an inspection.
So what is is that for, what is the purpose of that as to why they wouldn't be allowed to walk out?
No, because you have to be in full uniform. If you don't have the cap shield on your hat, you're not in full uniform. That's like
I wasn't sure if there was
a
utilitarian purpose of it.
No,
if it was more uniform.
It's like having the badge on your outermost garment. If you're in uniform,
I got you. Okay,
that's a part of the uniform. You have to have the entire uniform.
It makes sense, because otherwise you could be the bad guy that gets shot by John McClane.
And then there was a scene where there was a bunch of cops, and maybe half of them had their holsters empty. They weren't holding on guns. They just didn't give them one, not even a pretend one. And I'm just like, come on, guys. Yeah, I guess, they ran out of rubber guns.
We don't have a big enough budget. McClane is stealing all the guns. So, Well, going back to the movie franchise, we're up to Live Free or Die Hard. In that movie, when the FBI cybersecurity division in Washington, D.C. is hacked, they call in everybody to help track down some of their top suspects. And that brings John McClane into the picture as he's tasked with picking up Justin Long's character, Matthew Farrell. Immediately, when McClane shows up to Farrell's apartment, he shows him his badge, and Farrell thinks the badge is fake. Have you ever encountered a situation like that where someone you were there to help didn't think you were a real cop?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's I spent most of my career in uniform, but every now and then I was tasked with undercover assignments or plainclothes assignments. And it's amazing how the world looks different to you and how people, it's like, oh, so this is how it really works. Because when people see a police car and a person, and an officer in uniform, they act a specific way. When you're plainclothes, it's like, okay, I remember it was like 3:00 in the morning. I was on a plainclothes assignment and I was monitoring the radio and I heard a call for a stalker outside this girl's apartment window. And I'm like, oh, this could be fun. So I'm in a UC, which is an undercover car. There's there's unmarked cars and undercover cars. An undercover car is, I think I was driving like a Plymouth, what was it? A Chrysler Cordoba. It was old. It was just a jalopy. And, we had like beads on the rearview mirror. There's no way anybody could tell that's a cop car. There's a cop in there. Where an unmarked car is usually like a Crown Vic, and now they're going to be like the Explorers. And they don't have decals on the outside or lights on the outside, but they do have lights and a siren, and they're fully equipped like a squad car.
Yeah, I've seen those. They're not cop car. They're not painted like cop cars, but you can still tell, that they're cop cars.
You could tell. Yeah, absolutely. And we're not trying to be undercover with those. We're just trying to be not as noticeable with those. And it's amazing how, right away when you see that light bar and you see the decals on the side, you're like, oh shit. It's like, okay. And cops would do that too. I can't tell you how many times I'd be going to a call or something. I see red and blue lights behind me. I'm like, oh, what did I do wrong? There's that instant, even though I'm going to the same call. And I'm like, oh, wait, I am the cops. Okay, yeah, I'm okay now. And I'm like, all right. Yeah, it does happen. But anyways, so I get out. I'm wearing jeans and a T-shirt, and I've got a necklace badge. And, it's just my badge is on, like a necklace thing, a chain. And one side is the badge and the other side is my ID. And I've got a gun and handcuffs and my radio. And I'm just walking up and this guy is just like leering into this girl's apartment. And I'm like, hey, dude, what's up? He said, oh, not much. I'm like, what you up to, dude? And he's just like, who are you? And I pointed to the badge and he says, well, that ain't real. I'm like, oh, okay. So then I pulled up my T-shirt and you could see my gun and my handcuffs. And he said, those do look real. I'm like, yeah, they are. So that was kind of fun.
Okay, those are real.
Yeah. And then at the same time, like two uniform coppers start walking up and he's just like, all right, whatever. You got me. He couldn't let go. You can't stop love, I guess, but he just couldn't let go.
I'm trying to remember. I think that's basically what McClane had in this part too, was, on the necklace, his badge to show very similar situation. It sounds like, although different purpose to be there, of course.
Right. Yeah. If you're going to be arresting people, if you're plainclothes, you almost always have a uniform with you just in case something does go south. Some defense attorney's like, hey, my client just thought it was just some random dude with a gun and a fake badge, blah, blah, blah. So it's always nice if you can, to have some guys in uniforms.
That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned earlier with the FBI and stuff, when we saw that, in the first movie with some federal law enforcement, but in this one too, we also see John McClane being called in to help federal law enforcement. Is that a common thing for local law enforcement to be called to assist federal agents?
All the time. The ratio of city cops or county cops compared to feds is, there's probably like 100 to 1. There isn't a lot of feds. They're just numbers. There aren't many of them. If they are going to arrest somebody, usually they call us. and they don't do a lot of arresting, to tell you the truth. I remember one time I got a call from the dispatcher, and she's like, could you meet the Secret Service and bring a couple of your guys with you at blah, blah, blah location? I'm like, oh, wow, this could be cool. So I'm like, yeah, sounds fun. So it's like 8 o'clock at night. I meet this guy, and he's just wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and he's got a lot cooler gun than I do, a lot more expensive gun. And he's got, back then the Nextel cell phone that like chirped. He had one of those, and he had a BlackBerry. I'm showing my age. And he had a lot nicer equipment than we did. And he says, there's some counterfeiters in this apartment. I'm just going to knock on the door. I have a warrant. He said, it's not high risk. They're not supposed to be armed, but you never know. He said, I just want some uniforms. And I'm like, I totally get it. So we go in there, knocks on the door, Secret Service. And it's like, no, first he had me do it. I'm like, yeah, Milwaukee police. And they open the door for the police. And sure enough, this is an apartment. They had a computer and a printer, and they were literally printing money. It was so bad. It was like so
just
low
like a regular
quality.
printer?
Yeah. And they're printing money. And I'm just like, wow, like this, you're not even trying, man. This is almost like monopoly money. And the
just
Secret
scan
Service
it and print it off, I guess.
Yeah, and they're doing it in front of a Secret Service agent. I'm just like, oh, this is awesome. I absolutely love it. Yeah, it was very anticlimactic. I thought it'd be something really cool, and I'm just like, this is kind of boring, really. And he said, yeah, it is. He said, do you mind cuffing them up and taking them, downtown? He said, I'll take it from there. And I'm like, yeah, no problem. So, yeah, we do help, FBI, ICE, ATF, and DEA. They kind of keep to themselves. They do help us. Let's see. So FBI, yeah, the FBI is an interesting relationship. We have, or at least when I was still there, I'm sure they do. We had a human trafficking task force, and we had 1 or 2 FBI agents assigned to that, and they were with our detectives and police officers from our sensitive crimes division. And they were there more or less because, again, Washington has a lot more money than we do. They had a lot more resources, and they would help us out with stuff. Yeah, let's see. That was one example of that. Bank robberies. People think that the FBI responds to like every bank robbery. No, they don't. They don't. And if you do get an agent, usually it's like an hour after the fact. And they're taking down like notes about, okay, they're interested to see, okay, is this like a robbery crew? Are they going from city to city or crossing state lines? That kind of thing. So that's why the FBI is going to be there. Or if it's a bank robbery and they start popping rounds off and somebody gets shot or, God forbid, killed, then the FBI is going to respond. But it's still our baby. We're still taking care of the investigation.
It sounds like in a different situation, but is similar to what you talked about before, where like even when you were undercover, you wanted to have some uniformed cops there for the arrest itself. It sounds like it's a similar sort of thing, with except just federal agents, and then you're the uniformed cop that's there to help.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, if there is one scene from Live Free or Die Hard that really stands out to me, it's that scene where John McClane takes his car and he drives it into the helicopter. Obviously a Hollywood stunt, right? But that scene is the end of the sequence where we see McClane doing some pretty masterful driving. And as moviegoers, we just assume he's capable of doing this because of his training as a police officer. And I'm sure your training did not have anything to do with driving cars into helicopters. But can you share a little bit of
helicopter intervention? No, there was none of that going on. But
what kind of driving training do real police officers get?
When you're in the academy, you go through, it's called EVOC, Emergency Vehicle Operations course. And you're trained how to, do high-speed pursuits, how to do them safely, and they actually took us out to a racetrack here in Milwaukee. And that was a lot of fun. We had mock chases where you're in a squad car and you would chase the instructor. And you're chasing, you're talking on the radio at the same time, and it's not just like, I don't know, like a free for all. There's rules when it comes to chasing cars. It's like, okay, when you're pursuing somebody, if you're the squad, you have to get, okay, you give your squad name, you have to give your location. It's like, okay, squad 5, I'm northbound on University Drive, the 5400 block, pursuing a red Toyota Corolla with blah, blah, blah license plate. And the reason, okay, he's wanted for homicide. All right. As a boss, which I would let that go a lot further than, yeah, I'm pursuing him because he blew a stop sign. All right. Risk reward. It's like, am I going to risk this cop's life or other civilians, this high speed pursuit for something not that, big of a deal? But sometimes, and a lot of time, what I thought wasn't a big deal, all of a sudden, there's a lot of guns in the car or they're wanted for something pretty heinous. You don't know what you're chasing. So we get all trained up, they're behind the science, and they will hammer, the rules. Every department has their own rules, and there is state statute. You have to drive with due regard. You can't just go out there and, and think you're, a NASCAR driver or anything like that, or driving to helicopters or whatever. But, when I was new and for quite a chunk of my career, there were no cameras in the squads or body cameras. So it wasn't critiqued like it was once those things, got on. It's like, I remember going down city streets at over 100 miles an hour, where if you make one little mistake, you're dead. And it was on the job training. Let's just say that. And some were really good at it, and some cops were really bad at it and shouldn't be driving cars, I think. But hey, that's how you get trained up.
Well, maybe like you were talking about before, with McClane going from New York and then to LA back to New York, like he would have to go through the academy multiple times. He's just gone through so many times that now he knows how to drive into helicopters, right?
Yeah, very true. I guess maybe I was absent that day in the academy when we had the helicopter intervention training, but
Off that day.
yes, I must have missed it. I didn't go to that in service, whatever. Yeah, my bad. My bad.
Well, the last film in the franchise is A Good Day to Die Hard. This time, the franchise pushes the stakes even higher as it brings John McClane into international affairs. The plotline in this movie revolves around his son, Jack, who's in trouble in Russia, but then it turns out Jack is a CIA operative. And so together, we see this father-son team trying to stop a nuclear weapons heist. From this fictional storyline, we kind of get the concept of there's a parent and a child who are both in law enforcement working together. How realistic is it for multiple generations and different branches of law enforcement to work together like we see happening in the movie?
There are legacy cops. More, like my first partner on the job, her dad was a cop in Milwaukee for years, but they never worked together, like especially on a case. That's almost unheard of. Maybe in small towns or something that might be the case, but for the most part, no. And most places don't have hard and fast rules, but I wouldn't want to be in the same district or on the same assignment as my kid, because I would be overprotective. I would, yeah, I wouldn't be thinking of him as a cop. I'd be thinking of him, and it's only natural. I'm a dad. It's like that instinct is going to kick in first. And you may not do your job efficiently and effectively if you're thinking like that. But yeah, there's a ton of legacy cops. It's not unusual. It's like, oh, you see the nameplate and I'm like, hey, I know your dad. That kind of thing. It's like, it's kind of cool.
That makes a lot of sense. And I didn't really think about it this way, but I'm not sure, like the Sullivan brothers is something that comes up in the military. But, when that ship sank and it's like in World War II, all 5 brothers were lost. And so I could see it almost being a similar sort of concept. They wanted to separate then from there on out, the military started separating siblings. I could see it almost being a similar thing too. Like if you're there with your kid, not only are you not doing your job as well, which means that your life could be in even more danger, not only your life then, but also your child's life. And it just makes everything that much worse, not only for who you're trying to help, but yourselves as well.
Right. Yeah. And your kid might be acting a little differently than they normally would if you're there. I mean, it's just human nature.
Yeah, goes both ways for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, since the last movie takes place in Russia, we end up with a similar plot point that we saw in the first movie, except in the first Die Hard, it was New York cop going to LA when he happens to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. This time, the wrong place is Russia. So I asked about police officers in different jurisdictions earlier, but now I need to ask about an international jurisdiction. So as a police officer, if you're traveling to another country, like John McClane's doing in the movie, what would really happen if you found yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time outside of the U.S.?
Boy, you are truly a fish out of water. You are just John Q. Citizen. You have no special powers. There's no police friendship. There's no, whatever. You're just another dude, or another chick. That's you. You get a whole lot of nothing. And if you're in Russia, who isn't exactly our ally, and I've heard stories about Russian prisons. I know, like in China, the Chinese police can arrest you and not charge you for up to a year. So you could be rotting in a jail for a year without even getting charged with a crime. And, just there's no such thing as due process in Russia. The lines between the military and the police in Russia are very, very blurred. I would not want to be on the business end of an AK-47 with some Russian police officer. Hell no. It has all the
I mean, I wouldn't want to be in the business end of anywhere, whoever was holding it. But yes, definitely. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But yeah, I just think of Gulag, or something like that, and I'm like, no, thank you. That's something. It'd be an international incident. Hopefully our embassy would get involved in this, even if hopefully they would know, this happened, and the government can help you, that kind of thing. But with all the stuff blowing up and people getting killed and all, I mean, it's hard to like cover that up. It's like, okay, the police are going to be coming to this. And I never saw them.
Yeah, that's true. I was trying to think if they ever showed up, and I don't, no. I mean, I guess that would be an extra actor you have to pay. So maybe that was.
Yeah, I think I saw a couple of Russian like squad cars, maybe, that had like the little blue light on top. But other than that, I never saw like cops coming out and like trying to do cop stuff. They were pretty much, they had the run of the whole area there to do all their blowing up and shooting and all that cool stuff.
It's almost a complete inverse of the first movie, where there were a lot of cops and then just the feds came at the very end. But then at the end movie, it's like, CIA and then John McClane, and then all these other, high military or, secret things. And then, there's some kind of cops in the background. Maybe.
You're exact. You're right. I didn't think of that. Yeah. It's like the polar opposite, really.
Since you do offer your services to help screenwriters be more authentic with their stories, if they had hired you for the Die Hard franchise, what's one of the primary things that you think needs to change to help the storyline be a little more accurate?
Boy, I looked at that question and I'm like, it's so far-fetched. I think I would have taken a pass. I'm like, how can I can't fix this. It's so far off the rails that we talked about, just there's so much stuff, even with like, my favorite was the first Die Hard, he's got a gun on a plane. You know how hard it is, even back then, even if we're transporting prisoners, you still have to make all these notifications. And the captain of the airplane can say no, even if you get all these clearances and everything's honky-dory, you load, you get seated before anybody else, and you're the last one to leave, obviously, if you have a prisoner. And if you're just armed, and 99.9% of the time, it has to be stowed in your luggage, and there's all kinds of hoops you have to jump around to have a gun in your luggage. And it's not going to be your carry-on. It's going to be in the belly of the plane. And it's kind of a big deal. I mean, to me, I think it's a pain in the butt. I could, but I don't deal with it. It's just like, it's one more pain in the butt. And what if my luggage gets lost? I don't want my gun getting lost. It's no thanks.
Didn't think about that. That never happens in the movies.
No. Oh, shoot. They lost my luggage. Hey, like I said, I was a baggage handler. This stuff does happen. That's real.
Die Hard 2 is just John McClane at the little kiosk waiting for his luggage. That's the entire movie. It's just him waiting.
That'd be funny. I like that.
There are a lot of people I think are inspired by movies. And, for example, I've heard stories of like Indiana Jones inspiring people to become archaeologists. In your experience, have you ever seen a police officer like John McClane inspire people to become police officers in the real world?
Yes, and I would not want to work with them or go on a plane with them
Because
or
they
be in
want to
an
be John
airport with them.
McClane shooting with
Yes,
shoot first.
exactly. Yeah. We had some cowboys that I worked with, but even the cowboys or cowgirls would have to play by the rules or they get fired and criminally charged. I mean, there's only so far you could push the boundaries. And yeah, I mean, police work in a nutshell, a lot of it's really boring until it isn't.
I wouldn't want John McClane to be in my district. Let's put it that
Yeah,
way.
absolutely.
But one of the common movie tropes that we see happening in Die Hard and in a lot of movies too is when the bad guy tells their plan just as they're about to kill the good guy. In this one, for example, in the first movie, Hans tells John McClane the reason he started the fire in Nakatomi Tower is because they'll keep looking for him unless they think he's dead. I'm guessing that whole idea of the bad guy revealing their plan is something that's made up for the movies. But then again, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. Have you ever heard of the bad guys revealing their plan like we see happening time and time again in the movies?
No, most criminals I dealt with were really stupid. And it was either, and most of the criminality that I dealt with was kind of spur of the moment. It wasn't like a planned hit. It wasn't, like most of the homicides I went to they started as a fight and they escalated. I mean, yeah, there were like revenge or jealousy, follow the money, follow the sex, follow, whatever. But for the most part, it was like, hey, we're playing cards, you're cheating. It gets into a fight, I'm losing. I'm going to grab that knife off that butcher block and I'm going to stab you. That kind of thing. Whereas, yeah, I never met a criminal mastermind of any kind. I mean, they just, yeah, there ain't a whole lot of those running around. Thank goodness.
And John McClane just happens to run into all of them in
He
his
does.
career.
Yeah, darn the luck. And they all have accents and they're all really scary.
Well, from the first Die Hard movie is in 1988, and then the last one is in 2013. There's like a 25-year span. And something that we see John McClane seemingly struggling with in those 25 years is technology. For example, in Die Hard 2, McClane asks his wife how she's calling him, and she's like, it's the 90s now, so they have phones on the airplane. And 2007 Live Free or Die Hard is all about hackers, and the movie makes it seem like McClane just doesn't get along with the new technology. Now, I know your career as a police officer was also 25 years, different years from 95 to 2020. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But although it's not the same years as the Die Hard franchise, it's still 25 years of changing technology. Can you share how cops have used, or maybe as individual officers have struggled with technology like we see McClane seeming to do over the course of the movies and then your own 25-year career?
Yes. When I started in 95, we hand wrote all of our reports. The only computer in the whole district station was to run people, and their license plates. And there was only one of those. And there was a couple of typewriters, and you hand wrote your reports. You used carbon paper, you used white out, green out, pink out, depending on what the report was. So, it was pretty medieval. And I remember I got there and I'm like, where are the computers? And some day guy was like, what are you talking about, kid? We don't need those damn computers. And I'm just like, there was 2 dictionaries in the assembly that most of the pages were like missing out of them and stuff. And I'm just like, oh God. My handwriting's terrible. So I'm like, oh, this is no bueno. But, I started out with that, and the squad cars had no computers, no cameras. There was no body cameras back then. We didn't have tasers. People are, why didn't you use a taser? I'm like, we're poor. Big cities don't have big budgets. We don't have the money. So yeah, so we hand wrote our reports, and like I said, there was no squad computers, and slowly that stuff, started coming into fruition. And when we started getting all the computers, etc., I became a sergeant. I was boss. Now the cop on the street relies on that computer quite a bit. and they have cameras in their squads that automatically turn on when you activate the lights in the siren. And same thing with the body camera. Body cameras came about 3 years before I retired. As a sergeant, I didn't have to wear one. They didn't require bosses to wear them. So it was something new, etc. I mean, I had a computer in my squad, and most of the time it was a beverage holder, or an armrest. I'd have my arm up on the computer, like if I'm sitting around, smoking a cigar or whatever. I'm like, all right, I wonder if my cigar fits on that. All right, that'll work. But for the most part, no. And the younger sergeants would make fun of me all the time. They're like, "You didn't even turn that thing on today, did you?" I'm like, "Nope, sure didn't." And I was like, "I don't need it. It makes you." I mean, they're great tools, but they also make the cops lazy because you develop an ear for the radio. Say you're in a district and it's day shift. That might be like 25, 30 cops, somewhere in that ballpark. And you keep an ear out for the radio. Whereas it's like, okay, Dan just got sent to a battery, domestic violence, actor's still on the scene. They send you and your partner. Now, I'm going to keep that in the back of my head because I was like, well, those can turn south pretty quick sometimes. And it sounds like, and the dispatcher says, and there's sounds of people fighting in the background. Okay. Initially, they're going to send 2 squads. I'm going to keep that in the back of my head. Then they're going to send me to something else. Okay. Even though they sent me to something else, I'm going to keep in the back of my head where you are in case something bad happens. So you develop an ear for the radio, and the newer cops don't have that as well because they're constantly checking their screen. Like, Dan is at blah, blah, blah. That fraction of a second or 2 or 3 seconds can be a big deal. So I was never a huge fan of them. Every now and then I'd power it up if I had to, but for the most part, I just ignored it.
Were you then being asked to do more and more, just assuming that you could rely on the technology to do some of that for you? I think of, out even today, just, a lot of people are doing a lot more things or being asked to do a lot more things in their job because they're like, oh, well, you can just kind of allow the technology to remember that for you. But you're saying, remembering it in your head, which there's definitely a benefit to that. But then also I'm wondering are you being asked to do so much more that then it becomes hard to remember things?
Yeah, that's part of it. And, when we did get squad computers, they didn't have GPS. Now I do believe they have GPS, but I knew the neighborhood that I worked in like the back of my hand. And if I heard, 1234 North Astor Street, I could visualize it, or I'd have a pretty good idea where it was. The newer kids, and they're not kids, they're adults, they're relying on GPS. It kind of makes you dumb. And it's like, they're looking at a computer screen, whatever. And then another thing, they're expecting more. It's like, okay, well, you don't have to go to the district station to do your reports. You have a squad computer. You can do them on your computer in the car. And it's like, okay, because they want the cops on the street for visibility's sake too. More cops out there instead of sitting in a district station. But the problem with that is, it's not safe at all. Because where's your face? Where's your eyes? It's down at a freaking
because you're not looking
screen.
you're not focused on the computer screen.
Yep, absolutely. So I don't think it's very safe, and it's really awkward. If you've ever tried to type with your arms up like this, nothing is, they have all this equipment crammed in this little area, and it's just incredibly uncomfortable. And and nobody wants to sit in the same car for 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours. You got to get out and stretch your legs. And it's nice to have a change of scenery every now and then.
I hadn't thought about that of, if you're focused on your computer so much that, you don't know what's going on around you. And you always have to have situational, I think, even being a citizen, it's good to have situational awareness and know what's going on around you, especially when you're in a car, because you don't know what other people are doing. You might be parked, but there might be a crazy reckless driver out there too. Who knows?
Oh, absolutely. We call it head on a swivel, where, it's like you're constantly scanning for threats, and you don't have to be a cop for that. I've dealt with a lot of victims of crimes, obviously, and a lot of them had zero situational awareness. I never saw them coming. Yeah, because your face was buried in your phone, or you had AirPods in, and you didn't hear them, you didn't see them. You're in your own little world. People are like, I get a kick out of them. People are literally walking into each other now because their faces are buried. It's like, let alone some like scary dude that's going to rob you or do something worse to you. You have no idea. And the same thing with cars, like safety tips for cars. I exaggerate how much space I leave between me and the car in front of me. If I'm rolling up to a red light, I'm thinking of escape plans, because I've been to so many carjackings, and a lot of them happen at red lights. It's like, okay, before you know it, you have some guy shoving a gun in your face and, trying to drag you out of your car. Well, first off, it's like, okay, see that sidewalk? I'm going up on the sidewalk. I'm going to drive through somebody's lawn to get out. But if I don't leave any space in front of me, then I have nowhere to go. I'm trapped. I hate that feeling of being trapped. I always try to have some kind of escape route.
Probably not going through the helicopter like John McClane.
Yeah. Yeah. That is frowned upon. Yes.
Not a viable escape.
Yes.
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask for your take on the one question that everyone always debates when it comes to this franchise. In your mind, is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
Hell yes. It's the best Christmas movie. I love Die Hard as a Christmas movie. I play Die Hard every Christmas, and my kids, they're adults now, and they've got kids, and they're like, you're going to play Die Hard. I'm like, oh, hell yeah. I got to play Die Hard. It's Christmas, for God's sakes.
Okay, we're in agreement on that. Yes, I watch it every Christmas as well. Not the entire franchise, but at least the first one.
Lord, yes. No. Yeah, the first one for sure.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and chat about the accuracy of a police officer like John McClane on screen. Before I let you go, I have a two-part question for you, because not only do you have a fantastic podcast called Cops and Writers, where you help authors and screenwriters write more accurate stories, you've also written multiple books yourself, including a brand new book called The Good Collar that I'll make sure to add a link to in the show notes for everyone to order right now. Before I let you go, can you share a little bit more about your inspiration behind starting Cops and Writers and maybe give my audience a sneak peek into your new book?
Sure. The podcast, I started the podcast almost 4 years ago. As of yesterday, it's been 4 years. And
congrats.
Thank you. And as you know, it's a lot of work, sometimes for not a whole lot of reward, but you get to meet cool people. I think that's the best part of it. Some interesting people that you never would have if you didn't have the podcast. And
exactly. We wouldn't have a chance to talk about John McClane driving through helicopters. I keep going back to that one, but
why wouldn't you? I mean, yeah, of course. So I started the podcast to promote 2 books that I just wrote called Cops and Writers. And those books were for writers to get their police facts straight, more or less. And I started a Facebook group, and I started the podcast to promote my books. Well, before I know it, the Facebook group has 7,500 people in it from all over the world. And the podcast grew legs and just took off. And I'm like, I didn't at first really mean to do that. All of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, look at that. People are listening. I mean, you know what it's like. Sometimes you think you're just talking to a microphone and nobody's listening.
Yeah, for sure. It can be hard sometimes just talking to us. Like you're talking about, typing on the screen, you're just talking to a screen, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So, and then as far as, the podcast and everything else, I started out writing other books that had nothing to do with police work. And I was going to writers' conferences, and I bumped into people and made friendships with people that knew a lot more about this than I do. And they're like, you should really write a book, helping out writers, authors and screenwriters. And I'm like, okay, that sounds like a good idea. And when you go to these conferences, inevitably people are going to be like, oh, you're that cop guy. And I'm like, I'm not advertising it. I don't have a t-shirt on saying I'm a cop guy or whatever, and they're always very respectful. They're very nice. They're like, hey, would you need a warrant for this? Would my character, would he really do this? Or, she's a detective, and what would her, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, I'd be more than happy to help you. So that's kind of spawned another industry for me where yeah, I've helped screenwriters, I've helped authors, so it's been a lot of fun that way. And as far as my newest book, the Good Collar, it's just imagine Dexter, Death Wish, and John Wick got together and had a baby. That's what I love. I love Dexter. I always liked Dexter, and I thought to myself, well, could you think of Dexter, but instead of being the serologist, the blood spatter guy, it would be the police chaplain that everybody trusts, everybody loves, but he's got that vigilante thing in him where, okay, Dan just, murdered a bunch of orphans, you know, and burned the school bus or whatever he did, and he got away on a technicality. And it's like, so he rights the wrongs. And actually, the Good Collar, we could circle back to Bruce Willis because he did a remake of Charles Bronson's Death Wish.
That's true. He did, didn't he? Yeah.
Yes. That was, he played a Chicago ER doc. And his wife and daughter, I think the wife got killed and the daughter was like brutalized in their own home. And he gets a gun and he turns into this like Dr. Vigilante.
Well, it sounds like we have a lot of potential future episodes to talk about for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you again so much for your time, Patrick.
Thank you, Dan.
This episode of Based on a True Story was produced by me, Dan Lefebvre. Thank you once again to Patrick O'Donnell for helping us separate the facts from the fiction in the way that John McClane is portrayed in the Die Hard franchise. And if you want to follow along with another fun story, check out Patrick's new book called The Good Collar. I've got a link to that in the show notes, as well as you can always find it on the show's home on the web at basedonatruestorypodcast.com/367. Okay, now it's time for the answer to our 2 truths and a lie game from the beginning of the episode. And as a quick refresher, here are the 2 truths and 1 lie again. Number 1. Local police are often called in to assist federal agencies for arrests. Number 2. Off-duty cops from the U.S. can make arrests when they're on vacation in another country. Number 3. When a cop runs someone's criminal history, that is logged and monitored. Did you figure out which one is a lie? Got the answer right here in the envelope. So let's open this up and find out. And the lie is number 2. As Patrick explained, when a cop is off duty, they just don't have jurisdiction, even in another city, let alone another country, like we see happening toward the end of the Die Hard franchise. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. Before I let you go for today, if you enjoyed today's episode, you're going to love my mailing list. In these days where every social platform has its own algorithm, following or subscribing just doesn't really mean what it used to. So I've started up an email mailing list to cut through all of that. You'll find a link to the Boats email newsletter in the show notes for this episode, along with all the links that we've talked about today. Or you can always reach out to me directly at dan@basedonatruestorypodcast.com if you want to share an idea for a future episode, or maybe you just watched an awesome historical movie or TV show and you want to talk to someone about it. Obviously, these are the kind of things I love to talk about. Until next time, thanks so much for spending your time with Patrick and I today, and I'll chat with you again really soon.